Pete Calandra here. That was a performance of a short piece I wrote for piano, highlighting some advanced seventh chords in four-part writing. On today's video, we are going to go through the piece and I'll show you how it's constructed and what the chords are. Then there'll be two other videos in this short series, one where we go through altered seventh chords and a third where I show you how to create some short chord progressions using these techniques that can be used to assimilate this content. Before we get into the analysis, let's take care of some business. If you like this video, give a thumbs up. For more content, please subscribe, and to be notified, ring that bell. There is a link in the description box below for this PDF study guide, and it's free. But if you'd like to help out the channel, there's also a link where you can buy me a cup of coffee. Please leave any comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and let's get right into it. So let me play this first line, and then we'll break it down. So before I start talking about this, I've spelled out these notes in a way that makes more sense to me linearly rather than how they stack up in a sonority. So for example, going from the first chord to the second chord, this bottom voice in the top line is B flat, A flat, G. This is actually a C chord, and this should be a G sharp, but the line B flat, G sharp to G natural, that's not as, I don't think, correct in terms of notation than what I've got written here. And when you're doing music that's very chromatic, you're going to have to make choices. All right, so the first chord, you'll notice, is a stack of fourths. From the bottom going up, we've got C, F, B flat, and E flat. And if we take that bottom C and jump it up an octave so that we're in close position, you get F, B flat, C, and E flat, or an F7 suspended 4 chord. That chord is over C. That gives us our first chord. And we're moving from the first chord to the second chord in similar motion because all of the tones are moving similarly, not parallel, but similar. And we'll talk about parallel in measure 3. We're going from here to here. And the second chord, if we line it up in thirds, we have C, E, A flat or G sharp, and B flat. And that is a C7 chord with a sharp fifth. We have this little resolution of the sharp 5 down to the fifth. So in effect, in the first two measures, and this note here is dissonant and it resolves down. And then again, moving to the second measure, we have this chord here. And if we stack this up in close position, we have an A, a D flat or a C sharp, an E flat, and an A flat or a G sharp. And that is an A major seventh with the flat fifth. Flat fifth, major seventh. But that's also in drop 2 position. This chord is interesting also because it's got two names to it. Because if you take this A and jump it up an octave, you have E flat, A flat, A natural, and C sharp or D flat. And that is E7 flat 5 suspended 4th or E7 suspended 4th flat 5. That's that voicing's used in jazz all the time. So that's another way to voice it. The outer voices between the second and third chords go in contrary motion. So the B flat goes down to an A, and the C goes up to a D flat. So there's some contrary motion there. And then moving from that to the next chord, again, we've got this very dissonant chord here that gets resolved on the beat 4. So the beat 3 here, if we line this up in thirds, is G, B flat, D flat, and G flat. And that is a G diminished chord with a major seventh. Right, but it's in a drop 2 position. And we resolve that G flat down to an F. So we've got this nice inner voice in the alto, starting with this B flat. Right, a nice little sequence over 2 measures that complements the top line. Now, another thing about this chord is that the top 3 notes make up a G flat or an F sharp triad with a G in the bass. So that's kind of cool. And one other thing I'd like to introduce now is the concept of implied bass notes, right? So if we take this structure here and we add an E flat, we have an E flat 7 with a sharp 9, right? Or if we have an A in the bass, we have an A flat 13 with a flat 9. I mean, an A 13 with a flat 9, sorry. So what's cool about this is as you're writing this, you could write a piano part that simply leaves out the bass notes, and if you have a bass player, they can cover that stuff, and it's an economical way of utilizing notes. Let's move on to these 2 measures here. Here we've got parallel motion between all 4 of these chords, and then similar motion here. And what are these chords? These are what are known as slash chords for sure. And the first chord is A, D, G, and B natural, or a G triad over an A. Right, and you know, what's interesting about this is that what's the best sounding inversion? Well, I think that sounds great. That sounds great. If it's used that way. So in other words, I've got the G in the first inversion over the A, and then going down to F sharp triad, and then I'll go up to an A triad in the right hand, and this A down here will go down to a D. So that's almost like a 2-5-1. Right, so that inversion works nicely, and I like this inversion, the one that I've got here. That also works nicely. The one where it's in root position, that's okay. That doesn't sound as good to my ears as the other 2 do. And so these are basically the same chord, right? I'm just harmonizing that little melodic phrase. And then now this next chord is these tones. And if we take this C sharp and drop it down, we can call it a D flat, and we get B flat, D flat, E natural, and A natural. Right? And that is a B flat diminished triad with a major 7th. Right? So that's a really useful sound that I like, and I used it over here as well. Let's move forward to the next line and let me play it for you. And I'll tell you in advance that this line is just a little bit developed or varied version of the first line. So much chromaticism. All right, so one thing to note is that here the top line is all in half notes on this, right? Or the top voice is all in half notes. Here it's a dotted quarter and an eighth and a half. And that's just to give it a little variation. So instead of it being, it's, and the intervals are a little bit different. So in other words, instead of going from a B flat to a D flat, I'm going from a B flat to a C, and I'm just adding this little escape note right here. And I do the same thing on this second measure. Here, while the alto voice had half note, quarter, quarter, half note, quarter, quarter, here we've got all quarter notes. Starting right here on the alto line. So that gives us in the top 2 voices this. So let's talk about the chords that I'm using here. So the first chord, B flat, E natural, A flat, and D flat. So let's take that D flat, drop it down, and we could call the E natural an F flat, and then we get a B flat minor seventh with a flatted fifth. And then the next chord is A, D sharp, G, and C. Bring the C down an octave, and we turn the D sharp into an E flat, and we have an A minor 7 flat 5. So I'm just moving those down chromatically, those minor 7 flat 5 chords, and I'm disguising the motion a little bit, right? Because when this resolves here to the G flat, we get, and that becomes a fully diminished 7th chord. So that's an interesting result of having that little inner voice motion. On the next measure, instead of it being a minor 7 flat 5, it is a dominant 7 flat 5. So we've got A flat, D natural, or E double flat, G flat, and C. Bring that C down an octave. And we've got this, which is, I believe that's like a French 6th. In traditional 4-part writing, but that's the chord that we've got there. And then it goes over here to this sonority. So what is that? If we take this A and bring it down here, that's one way of looking at it. But if we keep the A up here, that is a ninth above the G, and we've got the 7th. And the C sharp can be a D flat or the flat 5, but we've got no third in this chord. And that really leaves it a little ambiguous, because is it or is it, right? So what you can do then is this would be a great candidate to have an alternate bass note played by the bass player. Or, right, so E flat and A natural works beautifully. Right here, we've got the quarter notes like we have up here, except that we are now adding this facet right here that we're starting on the 4th beat of the previous measure. So that's just a little variation. So let me play through this, and then we'll break it down. So the melodic line is, and the first chord is, take that A sharp, drop it down an octave, and we are left with an F sharp 7 with a flat 5. The next chord, take that B, drop it down an octave, G sharp, half diminished 7th, because the B is actually a C flat. And then the next chord, so this is interesting, it's F sharp, C, E, and G sharp. And much like this chord here, this note up there on the top, that's the 9th. So this is, then that moves to F, C flat, E flat, and A natural, or bring that A down an octave, and we've got F7 flat 5, and again on the next chord, we've got E, B flat, D, and F sharp, so we've got that 9th interval. So in this instance, we're going to keep it there. So that would be an E minor 7 flat 5 with no third. So those chords are really interesting, because if you take the notes and you put them all within one octave, you get B flat, D, E, and F sharp. And those notes are all found in the whole tone scale, right? So a whole tone scale will work over that if you're going to improvise over that chord like that. But so will just a regular minor. Going from here to the next chord, So what do we have there? We've got E flat, A, D, and G. So we drop down that G. And what that is an E flat major seventh, and this A here can be thought of as a B double flat. So E flat major seventh with a flat fifth. Let me play through this line now that we've talked about all those chords. Here we're moving in similar motion all the way down, and then here we've got some similar motion and some contrary motion depending upon which chords you're looking at. So in other words, between this chord and this chord, it's similar motion. Notes are moving in a similar way, but not parallel. The same between these two chords, but here you've got the top voice moving out and the bottom voice moving down. So you have a little bit of contrary motion in there. So this whole phrase is a little bit of a mix of both. Now we've got this B flat pickup to the next 4 bars. So let's take a look at that, because this is a little bit like a B section, a mini B section. So we'll talk about it on the other side of playing it. Okay, so first of all, there's a contrast of texture. So in other words, right here we've got these very tight, crunchy harmonies. All around the middle of the piano, and now we're jumping up an octave. And we've got this texture with a lot of space between these two notes of the left hand and these two notes in the right hand. So what chord is that? It's D, E flat, B flat, and G. Well, take these two notes and jump them up an octave, and you get B flat, D, E flat, and G, or an E flat major seventh in second inversion. And so these are, we've talked about drop 2 chords on my channel a bunch. These are drop 2 and 3. So you're taking the second note from the top and the third note from the top, and you're dropping them down an octave. Right? And then the next chord is an F minor 7 with no fifth. And this is the only chord in this piece, and it happens here and here, where a note is doubled. And the reason I'm doing that is I wanted to have, the contrary motion between the outer voices. I suppose I could have gone and made this into a G instead of an F, and maybe even done something like. But I like the simplicity of this. It's very simple. And then repeats. Just a little rhythmic variation of the melodic content. And then the next 2 measures are really interesting, and let me play them and then we'll talk about them. So the first thing you feel when you're listening to that is that the chords are going down. And if we look at the written chord names, they go down in minor thirds, the first 3. What's interesting in the melodic area is that you've got a line that goes like this. What I like about this is on the first measure, the melodic line is in the alto, and on the last measure, it moves up to the soprano. So there's sort of like a transfer of which voice that the melodic content is in. So very simple, nothing tricky here. These are all standard 7th chords in drop position. So let's take a look at them. First chord is E, B flat, D, and G. Take that G and drop it down an octave, and we've got an E minor 7 with a flat 5, or an E F diminished 7th. The next one is a C sharp diminished 7th. Take that E and drop it down. We've got that. Same with the next one. And then the last chord here, the A flat 6. On this one, we've dropped 1 and 3. So in other words, if I play it up like that, we take the 1 and 3 and drop it down an octave. That could also be an F minor 7th. Let me play that one more time, and then we'll move on to the next line. Now, in the next line, the B flat, which was up in the right hand as a pickup, is now in the bass, the pinky of the left hand. And we have a variation on this, right, with the melodic activity happening in the left hand, the lower voice of the left hand. All right, so nothing super tricky here in terms of the chords. This is a G diminished seventh, right? Just drop down that B flat an octave. This is similar to the very first chord of the piece, right? It's a B flat suspended fourth chord. Take that second note, drop it down an octave. And then just a diminished seventh here and a half diminished seventh here. Right here, we have in the melodic area, which sounds like it could come from a 1940s ballad. And I've decided to harmonize that with E flat and C minor chords for the first three beats. So we've got single note, then we've got E flat 6 over G, or C minor in second inversion. Then E flat major seventh over B flat. We've got B flat, D, E flat, and G. And these are all close position chords. Then C minor seventh. And now this last chord here is really interesting. It's F and C, the fifth, with the G, the second, and the B flat, the fourth. But if we take that top note down and drop it down an octave, we have C7 with a suspended fourth. So that suspended fourth, seventh chord is beautiful, and it's very useful, and we'll be going over that in more detail in the next video. And then we end up on this very juicy chord. And this would be a B triad with a sharp 9 in there. B, D sharp, F sharp, and D. Right, but I've got it voiced like this. Now, this actually, if I were to say this is another chord, you could put an F in there. Right? And then that becomes a beautiful F seventh chord with a flat 9, a 13, and a flat 5, no third, or I could add the sixth note in there with the A. So that's kind of cool. But basically what's happening is that the top note is going up and the bottom note is going down, right? So we've got a nice contrary motion there after this parallel or similar motion, which is nice. And then our last line starts with a pickup, and we go back to our drop 2 chords. Let me play this line and we'll talk about it. All right, so there's nothing unusual here. These are just drop 2 voicings of an E flat major seventh, an A half diminished seventh, and a G minor seventh. And then right here, oh, I didn't put the chord voicing there. What is that? Oh, that is a G diminished or an E diminished seventh, or any one of those diminished sevenths, right? If we take the top note and drop it down, it's a G diminished seventh. And then an F7, a half diminished. Now this next note is interesting, right? It's E, G sharp, D, and G natural. And this again is one of these chords that either omits the third or the 5. In this case, we've omitted the 5, the B natural in this, because this is a nice sounding chord, right? But it sort of doesn't fit in with the texture of this piece. So in other words, if I play it from here, that works beautifully. And the next way works beautifully too, but for me it's a little thick all of a sudden. Right? You don't need that B in there. And then the last chord, E flat, G, C, and F, right? That's what's called a 6/9 or a 6/9 chord. It's beautiful. That brings us to the end of this first part of this little short series on advanced 4-part harmony. Hopefully that was enlightening for you. Download the PDF, play through this. It's not very difficult to play. It's sophisticated harmonically, but it can be sight read by any intermediate pianist and worked out by a beginner pianist in a few days. It shouldn't be too difficult. And notice that when you write like this, every note has meaning. Every note has value. Every note says something. And there's only one spot where I've doubled a particular pitch, and that's on this measure and on this measure. Everywhere else, each note has a different function, and you don't need any more than this to write something really sophisticated and expressive. I've been Pete Calandra. Please like, subscribe, share, download the PDF, buy me a cup of coffee, please, leave comments. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that this has been helpful. I will catch you on the next one.